if our AV person would put the camera on him as he reads passage this morning. Thank you.
Good morning. This scriptures from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verses 21 through 35, the New Revised Standard Version. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and she had got no better, and rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his cloak, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt her body that she was healed of her diseases. Immediately aware of the power that had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about the crowd and said, "Who touched my cloak?" And his disciples said to him, "You see this crowd pressing in on you? How do you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you very much, Jim. That's a pretty negative verse to end on, isn't it? Well, come next week and you'll see what happens. Good to see you all. Thank you, Jim, for doing that. I want to, since COVID, we haven't been reading in front of the sermon. I want to get back to that. Today I want to talk to you about these 12 years. There's a woman who is sick for 12 years, and there's a child who has lived for 12 years, and it mentions that a couple of verses apart, so it must be significant. Pardon me? Closer? Okay. Here's a verse from Haggai. "Thus says the Lord of hosts, ask the priests for a ruling. If one carries consecrated meat in the fold of one's garment, and with the fold touches bread or stew or wine or oil or any kind of food, does it become holy?" And the priest answered, "No. If one who is unclean touches any of these, does it become unclean?" And the priest answered, "Yes." Hold that thought. Next slide, please. Jesus answered and said to them, "It is not those who are well who need a physician, but those who are sick." This saying of Jesus is only found in the book of Luke, and there's one place in Colossians where Paul mentions that Luke is actually a medical doctor. And once we know that, we can see why Luke, well, that seems pretty loud to me. Is that loud? Okay, something needs to change because that's too loud, because I might say something and it might blow your ears out. So Luke is a guy that is constantly talking about the miracles, more so than the others. The others also cover the miracles of Jesus, but Luke is especially interested in miracles. And that pole with a snake on it, that's the medical symbol, but that comes directly out of the Bible. Back in the days when the children of Israel grumbled against God and the snakes came and bit them, Moses was told to put the snake on a pole and raise it up, and anybody who looked on the snake on the pole would be healed, which is what he did. And that's why Jesus said, the Son of Man must be lifted up, talking about the healing ministry of Christ when he is on the cross. So I just wanted to mention that Luke is a doctor. He's looking at a couple of cases here where Jesus healed people, and I just wanted to put that on as a little bit of background information. Now, next slide, please. Many of the rules that the Jews were told to follow were medicinal in nature. And for the most part, they were preventative. For instance, they were told to only eat animals that had a cloven hoof and chewed the cud, which means that no animal that is not an herbivore is a good thing to eat. And so God told them what kind of animal. They weren't allowed to eat any shellfish. Did you ever get sick on shrimp or any kind of shellfish? Oh man, when I was about 18 or 19, I went to the restaurant and they had fried shrimp, great big plate of them. I was so sick. Some of my kids are allergic to it. Are you allergic to seafood, Daisy? Clogs up your throat. They were told that they could eat any kind of fish as long as it had scales and fins. So that left out, my favorites, the king crab and lobster and all of those things. But can you imagine what it would be like to go to the market in those days in the heat of Israel and pick out a lobster or pick out a crab or whatever? I mean, no refrigeration. Really, to eat that kind of stuff in those days was, a dangerous thing to do. Now, even though people did not discover that germs, bacteria, and viruses and things caused problems with people, they knew that there was something that caused, the disease, the plagues and stuff would spread. They knew there was something that did it, but they didn't realize that it was germs. But in biblical times, if you look at the law of Moses, they had to wash their hands before they ate. I mean, the whole type of behavior, the whole type of lifestyle that would prevent these kinds of diseases from spreading from person to person, there were laws against it. I mean, the thing, don't do this, don't do that. And most of them were preventative. It doesn't say, you shall do this and then you'll be well, but it says, don't do these things and you have a better chance to be okay. So here we have our passage where Jesus has just been across the lake and he's cast the devils out of that guy. Now, I felt really bad last week when we had so many visitors and the sermon was on demonic possession. At least a couple of them are back this week, but I don't know where the others went. But I can imagine what they thought when they got out of here. But Jesus was over there, and he healed the demoniac, and the people saw that he was healed, and they came, and they said, get out. Leave our country. We don't want, this scares us. We don't want any more of this. And so Jesus immediately, even because he wasn't welcome, he immediately got in the boat, and he came to the other side, and this is the occasion of what we're talking about today. And when he got to the other side, which was the west side of the Sea of Galilee, or the lake, and the people were glad to see him. They were waiting on the shore in order for him to get back. And so as soon as he got there, this synagogue leader came and begged him to heal his daughter. Try to imagine it. This guy who's probably very respectable. He's not a rabbi, he's a synagogue leader. He's the one that he's in charge of appointing people to do singing and people to do Bible reading and all the things in the service. And he comes and he falls down at Jesus' feet. He said, please come to my house. My daughter is dying. Can you think of a more horrible situation than that? The child is dying. And so Jesus immediately goes and follows him. Next slide, please. Presumably, Jairus had been concerned for the godly training of his daughter and those others in the congregation. We would assume that. He was probably there every week. Next slide. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, who was dying, and as he went, the crowds pressed on him. Now, when we look at this sentence, we can't see if the crowds press specifically on Jesus, but it appears that the crowds are pressing on Jairus. And probably both were true, but the sentence doesn't point out which one it is. And so there were a lot of people, and everybody wanted to talk to Jesus. People were probably asking him questions about the Bible, asking him questions about what he's doing, and he's on his way to this guy's house, and there's people all around. By the way, I saw a crowd on Friday night. I made the mistake of going to hear the Dixie Chicks. And I can tell you it was eye-opening. And I'll tell you about it sometime. But there were at least 10,000 people there, and so I'm just mentioning it today. And I will tell you about it at some point, but not today. But that was a crowd. There had to be 10,000 people there. Sean says there were more. How many does it hold? Over 15,000. There was every single spot all the way up the hill was taken, and we were the first ones in the door, and so we were right on the front line there. And yeah, when they got going, I don't want to get too sidetracked on it. When they got going on some of their stuff, a whole bunch of people walked out, and we did too. And unfortunately, I didn't get to hear "Goodbye Earl," which is my favorite Dixie Chick song. But that was they sang that at the end. No extra charge for that. The whole experience bothered me. So here's this big crowd, and they're pressing on Jesus. Next slide. Now, there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had spent all she had on physicians. Now, it's interesting that Luke, being a doctor himself, would mention the medical bill. But medical bills can really harm a family situation, and this lady apparently had nothing left. She'd been to every doctor in the country, and there wasn't anything that anybody could do. Now, a lot of times, I'm no doctor, but a lot of times when women have these type of issues, it requires surgery. And they didn't have surgery in the first century, so they had to believe in divine healing because there really was no other option in those days. And so she's been 12 years. Well, 12 years is not a long time in life, but it's a long time to be sick. I mean, we moved over to Cheshire 12 years ago. And when you are 12 years seems like a long time. But when you're 68, 12 years doesn't seem like that long. But it would seem like a long time if we were sick for 12 years and there was nothing we could do about it. And so she comes and she seeks healing because she knows that Jesus heals people, but she also knows that she can't touch Jesus. You say, well, how do you know that? Well, let me show you. She came up, next slide please, she came up behind him and touched the fringe of his clothes, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. Well, how did she know that? I don't know about you, but I can tell when my nose is running. Would you like to use this? Why wouldn't you want to use this? It was perfectly clean this morning. I'm trying to make a point. You'll see it in a minute. The Talit. Numbers from Moses, a couple thousand years BC. Speak to the Israelites, tell them to make fringes on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and put a blue cord on the fringe at each corner. You have the fringe so that when you see it, you will remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, and not follow the lust of your own heart and of your own eyes. If you look up this garment online or in the Jewish Encyclopedia, it will tell you that the fringe garment was worn as a prayer shawl. You've seen the Hasidic Jews. It doesn't say they're supposed to wear those hats. Nothing in the Bible says they're supposed to wear a yarmulke or a hat, but the Hasidic Jews wear a hat, and they don't trim the hair on the side of their face because it says that you shall not round the corners of your beard, and they have a beard. And they have these leather things that when they pray, they put the leather thing here on their forehead, which has prayers in it, and scriptures are in a leather pouch on their arms, and you've seen them at the Wailing Wall. They bow down before God at the Wailing Wall, and they say their prayers. And the purpose of this garment is, according to Numbers, is so that they remember to keep the commandments of God, and according to tradition, is to represent their prayers and to think about prayer life, not just when they're in the synagogue, but wherever they go is a life of prayer. So if they see somebody that needs prayer, and you're out in the street, somebody needs prayer, they see you're a praying guy, you're a religious guy, and so therefore they know who you are. So Jesus wore this thing. Sometimes we see these pictures of Jesus. He very rarely has this garment on, but he really did at all times have this garment on. And she didn't seek to touch him personally. She sought to touch the corner of his garment because she, in her mind, I don't know if this is superstition on her part or not, but in her mind, she believed that if she touched that, she would be healed. So she came up and touched it. Now, is the garment clean? She's an unclean person. Let me show you what the scripture says about an issue of blood. And when I say this, I'm talking about female issue of blood. There's also a lot of laws about if a male has an issue as well. I'm not talking about that today, but it is an equal opportunity thing between men and women when it comes to issues. Now you have an issue with me. Next slide. Then Jesus said, "Who touched me?" And the woman lied. She denied it. Everybody denied it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. Came to the woman. I didn't do it. You cannot lie to God and get away with it. You can lie to yourself, but you can't lie to God. You can lie to other people, but you can't lie to God. And the other thing is that God knows who you are and he knows what you need. Master, the crowds surround you and the press is on you. Why would you ask such a thing? We're in this big crowd of people. The other night we had people that came and sat in front of us. And there was a little bit of space in front of me. And the people that were sitting in these two spaces were fighting about how much room each had. But the people that were in front of us, one row, because we sat up just one row, they were there first. And the people that sat next to them were, "Why don't you move over?" We were crowded in tight. Nobody likes to be in tight. Nobody likes for somebody to be in your face. Nobody, I tried to go down to the restroom and I couldn't get through. I was bumping into people going this way, people going that way. That's exactly what the situation was like. And Peter said, "Hey, the crowds are all around you. It's no big deal. Nobody touched you." But Jesus knew better. Next slide. Crystal can tell you this. We in the fire department are all required to take a bloodborne pathogen training every year. And there's been times, there was a murder down on West Lake Road about 2 or 3 years ago, and they had everything cordoned off, and there was blood in the road. And I was down there, and the lieutenant said, "Don't step in that blood." You know, my blood's clean. If I spilled some of my blood on you, it wouldn't be a problem. I don't have any disease. But you don't ever know. Sometimes when we get on a call, I think one time we went down to Bristol Harbor, and it was so bad that the ambulance guy threw up when he saw it. I didn't throw up, but I didn't get close enough to. It was just horrible, and you just knew that was unclean situation. You know, people go in with a hazmat suit sometimes because they don't know what all that body fluid and stuff is. And this, can you imagine living like this for 12 years? It had to be horrible. It had to be horrible for her. It had to be horrible for her husband, if she had one. It had to be horrible for her father and for her mother. And so she really needs help, and Jesus was there to give it to her. Next slide. I don't know if this is Wegmans or not, but they didn't have a Wegmans in the first century. Back in the second millennium BC, it says if a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her impurity or her monthly cycle, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her impurity or her monthly cycle, all the days of the discharge she shall continue in uncleanness. Well, how does that work out practically? Next slide. Every bed on which she lies during all the days of her discharge shall be treated as a bed of her impurity. Everything on which she sits shall be unclean. And as the uncleanness of impurity, whoever touches these things shall be unclean and shall wash this must be the New American Standard Version, because in the New Revised Standard it would certainly say, wash their clothes, his clothes, and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. So if you come upon a person like this, and if you touch them or if they touch you, the first thing you need to do is wash your hands. Good medical advice from 4,000 years ago. Well, what about this poor human being that has to live like this, and everybody is trying to stay away from her? She's an outcast. She's not supposed to be in the crowd with these people. People are pushed up against her, and she's there because she knows that Jesus can heal her. And she knows that all she has to do is get close enough. Who did she have to push out of the way to get up that close to Jesus? You know, try to get close to a celebrity. You know, there's not that easy. Next slide. Peter's a logical guy. It's nothing, just the crowds. Next slide. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I noticed the power had gone out from me. I noticed it. She didn't actually touch him. She touched the place that he held when he did his private prayers. You know, if you look at the Gospels, you see Jesus praying alone all the time. You don't really see him praying publicly. He just come out or be healed, you know, that type of thing. He speaks to the healing. He speaks to the demoniac. You don't see him laying hands on in prayer. Now, of course, the New Testament says if anyone's sick, they should call the elders of the church, and they should anoint them with oil, and the prayer of faith will heal the sick. Well, that was the job of Jairus. People are coming to Jairus all the time. Oh, you're a holy man. You're running the synagogue, and you're here all the time. You're faithful. Can you pray for me? But Jairus is in the place where he needs prayer for himself. And you know, the elders and the pastor, they need prayer as well. Feel free to pray for me at any time, and pray for my wife. She has a major cross to bear, being married to me. Am I right? Yeah. She knows how to keep her mouth shut. Next slide. When the woman saw she could not remain hidden. Did you ever try to hide from God? Jonah, go to Nineveh. Jonah gets in a boat to go to Tarshish. Completely the opposite direction. Nineveh is a land journey. Tarshish is a sea journey. You can't hide from God. And she was trying, she's probably a humble person, and she probably didn't want to make any kind of scene, and she certainly probably didn't want anybody to know what her problem was or what her medical problem was. And then she comes trembling, and she falls down, and she explains why she touched him and how she had been immediately healed. This is testimony. You can say, well, the Bible says this, and the Bible says that, and this is how we should live. And people go, yeah. But when you say, this is what happened in my life, and this is how Jesus helped me, they can't deny it. They could deny it, but it's much harder for them to deny it than, they're not interested in what we believe. They're interested in whether God can make a difference in our life. If he can heal us, if he can make us in a better place, if he can heal our marriage, if he can, heal our financial problem. That's what they're interested in. And so she, in the midst of this crowd, is telling people how Jesus healed her because she knew that it had dried up. Now, Jesus, next slide, he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Now, I can't see Jesus saying this to an older woman. Can you? He's 28 years old. That's pretty young. How old are you, Caleb? 36. You wouldn't say Janice Adams' daughter, would you? No. This has to be a fairly young woman for Jesus to do the diminutive thing, daughter. She might only be 24 years old, 25 years old, and she's got this problem, and Jesus healed it. Go in peace. Next slide. Oh, wait. What about the other young woman? And they came from his house and they said, don't trouble the teacher anymore. The girl's dead. Can you imagine getting a message like that? They didn't have cell phone. This wasn't a text. This wasn't a phone call. This wasn't a telegram. Don't bother the teacher anymore. How did Jairus feel at that moment? I think I know how he felt. Hopeless. Crushed. But Jesus said, have faith, it's going to be okay. And that's what Jesus always says. Have faith, it's going to be okay. Now I notice that everybody's on this side of the church, so I don't have to look over here to Gene, and this whole crew is not here today. So what do you get out of this? Anything the Lord showed you from this passage? I'm sorry if you didn't like the subject, but it's in there, so that's what you get. Yes, sir. Microphone, please.
If she was young, then she probably suffered with this, since she went through puberty, which means she never would have been able to get married, because nobody would have married you if you have this ongoing condition. She never would have been able to have kids. So on top of 12 years of pain, she literally has, she doesn't have any relationship with anybody. She has no hope for the future and a life of suffering. So it's even worse than it sounds when you hear that, she's bleeding constantly for 12 years. It was a hopeless life.
But Jesus can change a hopeless life into a life of hope. Good point, Caleb. Anybody else? Jim Slomsky in the back.
I'm sure there's many of us who've been praying for things for decades. Maybe didn't see anything change. But this might give us hope that eventually it will.
Thanks, Jim. Anybody else? Up here, Janice?
She is very lucky because if you bleed for 12 years, you're not going to live too long because she couldn't have been very healthy. Her iron depletion was probably gone, and so she was very lucky to come across Jesus when she did.
Yes, ma'am. That's true. No one else? Well, what about the other girl? Come next week, we'll talk about her. Pardon me? Yeah, we're going to do communion, I forgot. But you know what I'm going to do first? Wash my hands.